All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Sorry it's been a minute since I've been on here, but this is a subject that has been weighing on me for quite some time. So, those of you who have been around the channel for a while know that we do a lot of speak about different brands of cameras because I use a lot of different brands of cameras, and I try to keep everything that I have on the channel, all of my opinions, true to my experience. So I am a full-time photographer. I have had many different brands. I shoot both stills and video on Sony, Canon, Blackmagic, Red. I have had Nikon cameras in the past, but there's something that's very troubling about Nikon. And this has been for quite a while. And I don't want what I say in this podcast to be misconstrued in any kind of way because I know that within the camera community, there are diehard fanboys, for lack of a better term, of one brand or another. I've often said, and this is true, that I'm about as camera agnostic as they come. I take these are tools to me. These are tools for me to accomplish work, and so I take what the right tools are to accomplish the work that I'm going to be performing. So I know that there are Nikon fanboys out there. I don't want this to be misconstrued. I hope that Nikon continues to be a market force because traditionally they were. For a long time, it was either Canon, right? What do you shoot, Canon or Nikon? And then the doctors shoot Leica and Hasselblad and stuff like that. But those were the two competitors. Now, to put this into context, what I'm going to say about Nikon here and why they are in third place and for the foreseeable future are going to remain in third place behind Canon and Sony. I want to take us back a couple of years, and that is when the advent of mirrorless really started to catch on. Now, I often say, and I think this is true, that the most important camera in at least the past decade for this industry was the Sony A7 III. Without a doubt, full stop. And the reason for that is because before the A7 III, there weren't many mirrorless options on the market and they weren't very good. So even the ones from Sony before the A7 III, they had very poor battery life. They had problems with heat. The EVFs were just crap. You couldn't really see anything through them and such. Panasonic had, some of the GH cameras, and those were good, but those were very video focused. But there wasn't really a professional photographer's tool before the A7 III. Now, right before the A7 III, the A1 or A not A1, but A9, the original one, came out, and it was a very strange thing. I mean, it was really expensive, right? It was like $4,500 camera, and it didn't have any native long glass in that ecosystem there. So it's a sports camera without any lenses, really. So people didn't catch on to that. But the A7 III came out, and here was their $2,000 camera that had flocks of professionals going to Sony from Nikon and Canon mostly at that time. And I was one of them. So that's right when I started my professional photography career, right there, 2017, 2018. And I had been shooting Nikon crop bodies, the most recent of which is the D70-200. Still think it's a fantastic camera to this day. It was like a Costco special kind of thing, where you get the camera and a couple kit lenses and such. But the Sony A7 III now put a full frame camera for $2,000 into the hands of professional photographers. And along with the A7 III, they started very quickly developing really nice glass. The 16 to 35 G Master came out about that time. The first 24 to 70 G Master came out about that time. And so now you have an ecosystem that people could really get behind. And the battery life with the Z battery was much better. The EVF was much better than it had been before. The A7 III is an absolute workhorse. It does not overheat. And so that was really a turning point. And the big thing, and why there aren't many professional photographers these days that are still on DSLRs, is because of the workflow, right? So you don't shoot a mirrorless versus a DSLR because the mirrorless has any better image quality. That's just nonsense. We had DSLRs like the Nikon D850 is a good example. It's a 45 megapixel camera. The 1DX cameras, you know, they were low resolution, but they were huge quality. They had huge dynamic range. So you don't shoot a mirrorless over a DSLR for any kind of image quality. The reason you shoot mirrorless is for workflow, right? So you don't have to chimp. So those of you who've never shot DSLRs, chimping is when you kind of guess at your exposure and you click it, and then you go back and you look at your photo and then make your adjustments with your settings, and you go again. You don't have to do that with a mirrorless because you can see your exposure in real time right there. Let me bring up the comments here. Bear with me just a second, and then I will. Carlos Quintero, how you doing, bud? So I love Nikon. I don't think you have any Nikon cameras, do you? And you know what? And I know why. It's going to be because what we're talking about here. They're awesome, even if they are in third place. I absolutely agree. You know, and that's why I said, yeah, this is going to be a shots fired moment for some of these Nikon guys. Their glass is awesome. We'll get into that because I kind of disagree about that in the you know, in the modern sense of the glass. So going back to my story here, right? Uh, Mirrorless versus DSLR. Mirrorless is an obvious choice now because the battery life is the same. The EVFs, okay, for anybody out there shooting a DSLR and you like that optical viewfinder, I think an EVF won't be the same. Go get your hands on a Sony A1 or go get your hands on a Canon R3 because the A1 has a 9 million dot EVF at 240 hertz refresh rate. You cannot tell a difference. In fact, it looks better than the optical viewfinder because the glass that it's looking through is better than the DSLR glass, right? So that's not a concern anymore with the EVFs. So Sony brought out the A7 III, went like gangbusters. Canon, okay, and this is where these companies start to diverge at the time, decided to go mirrorless too. Now, Canon did a very interesting thing in that they released the EOS R, which by any measure was a crap camera. It just wasn't any good. It had a good sensor. It was the 5D Mark IV 30 whatever it is megapixel sensor, and it had a good sensor, but it had one card slot. It was slow. It had this stupid touch bar thing on the top that thankfully they jettisoned with the next you know, few redesigns they've had. It had an enormous crop in 4K. It was like 1.8 times or something like that to record 4K. The 4K did look good, and it was actually 10-bit 4K when you, I think, sent it out to an Atomos recorder. So its video specs were maybe a little, just a touch better than the A7 IIIs just because of that 10-bit. But the EOS R was not a very good camera. But, okay, one thing that they did that was very telling of Canon's roadmap at that time is they started introducing lenses for their new RF mount that were crazy. Now, it says in the show notes here that I'm shooting this with the 50 millimeter 1.2. I'm not. I'm shooting it on the lens that I wanted to talk about, and that is the 28 to 70 f2 is what I'm using right now. Those of you who have never seen this lens, because it is kind of kind of a unicorn. I mean, you're probably not going to walk into too many. I mean, you're not going to walk into a Best Buy and see it there. I don't think. Right? It's a $3,000 lens. It's I call it the Chodester because it's very big and chody and stuff. But it is. And Carlos, I know you have one of these too. The 28 to 70 f2 is like a collection of primes. I mean, it is it is so incredibly sharp and just the colors are punchy. And you know, this is something that's true across the whole RF line. So I'm getting to a point here. So Sony with the A7 III, Canon with the EOS R. Sony had the better camera. Canon had the better lenses because the RF lenses are just fantastic, right? And where was Nikon? Well, Nikon in the meantime was sitting back and selling DSLRs. And not only were they sitting back and selling DSLRs, but they were actively sitting back and selling DSLRs. And I say that what I mean is this. At that time, I remember Nikon making public statements to the tune of, yeah, we're just going to sell DSLRs. You know, it's kind of like the rap music is a fad kind of thing, right? Remember when people said that when rap music, I maybe dating myself, oh, rap music will be dead in 5 years. Guess what? It's like $1 billion industry, right? And that's the way that the cameras have gone is to mirrorless. So Nikon was late in the game, where Sony and Canon were pulling ahead. Now this is not why Canon has had a big flop, but I'm getting there. Okay, this is not it. So we fast forward a couple of years. Now we start seeing the next generation of these cameras. This is where Nikon jumps in with the Z6, Z7, the Z, whatever the crop sensor one is. And they're okay. They're okay cameras. They're pretty good, actually. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But they still kind of seem rudderless, right? Their mount's good. They're still giving a lot of attention to like the D850, which by a lot of people's estimation is the best DSLR that was ever created. And there's I can see a solid case for that. You know, D850 is an awesome camera. It's heavy, you know, it's heavy as all get out, but it's an awesome camera. So you know, Nikon starts making these good lenses, and they start making cameras to say, okay, this is the way that you know, we're not going to stay in third forever. And this is the transition when Sony jumped ahead of Nikon to be Canon's really only competitor. You know, whereas it used to be Nikon was Canon's only competitor. It's because Nikon really flopped the transition. But that's not the flop we're talking about today. Sony then decides, well, let me back up. Canon first unveils the R5. This is Canon's first truly professional mirrorless camera. It's not the EOS R, it's not the RP. The R5 is a beast of a camera. It is, what is it, 2 or 3 years old now, and still holds up very competitively to flagship cameras from other brands. That's how good the R5 is. And it really is. This is when the rubber meets the road for Canon. They had been giving us a roadmap that says, you know what, this 28 to 70 f2, we didn't develop lenses like this to be selling cameras in Costco. You know, we didn't develop cameras like this or with lenses like this to be selling cameras in Best Buy. We want Canon cameras to be in the hands of professional photographers. We want to be at the forefront of imaging. That's what lenses like the 28 to 70 f2 developed by Canon are saying. They're shouting it from the rooftops because it is a crazy thing. And now they're developing what 2.8 zooms that are, you know, 100 to 300 or whatever it is, right? Uh, Other companies aren't building things like this. And it's the high-end types of things. All these companies also focus perhaps more so on the lower end because they sell much more of that product. But Canon's MO, I think, by way of their lens design, by way of how they go about enforcing their patents, right, around the RF lens mount to third-party lens manufacturers. And I know that's a polarizing topic, but all of those things tells you Canon cares to curate who is using their products more so than any other of these companies. Now, that's neither good nor bad. It is what it is, but it's apparent to me. That's what it looks like Canon's doing, right? Sony, complete opposite of that, right? They flood the market with influencers. And anybody who's got any kind of following on YouTube and they say, hey, Sony, you know, can you make me a deal? Sony will make them a deal. You know, and they'll give them the gear, or they'll heavily discount the gear, or they'll put it on permanent loaner to whoever, you know, hey, make a review for this thing. And you know, you can send it back whenever. You know, they do that and it works brilliantly for Sony. You know, they sell a whole lot of gear um, from that approach. So Sony wants to sell volume. I don't think Sony is as careful about curating who uses their products as Canon does. But again, just like Canon, that's neither here nor there. It's neither good nor bad. It's Sony's identity. You know, they want to be the camera brand for the masses. They have a smaller body, you know, probably so they can fit in more people's hands than the Canon bigger body, right? If you have a small body, you can put a grip on it. If you have a big body, it's uncomfortable in any kind of way, right? So Sony is that. Where's Nikon through this? We're getting into Nikon's biggest flop, okay? Sony, after the R5, unveiled the Alpha 1. Alpha 1 is still, in my opinion, and I'm sure plenty of other people's, the most mind-bending, craziest full-frame stills camera that has ever existed. And there have been some cameras since the Alpha 1 that compete with the Alpha 1. And I do the air quotes because it's like, it competes in price. Like the R3 is one of those. The Z9 is one of those. But at its core, the Alpha 1 still does things that those other cameras can't do. It's got a 50 megapixel stack sensor, and it can shoot 30 frames per second, I think uncompressed RAW with that. That is way more throughput and resolution than the R3 will ever do. With the Z9, okay, Nikon made the strange decision of taking away a mechanical shutter at all in the Z9, which really throttles its maximum flash sync speed. And so anybody who uses lights like I do, you can get almost a full stop more ambient light control out of the Alpha 1 than you can a Z9. That's not something that's going to matter to um, sports photographers. It's not going to matter to wildlife photographers and such, but it matters to me. I use lights in my daily workflow, and I'm trying to capture very high dynamic scenes, right? Shooting real estate and interiors. It's a huge amount of dynamic range when you have nuclear window light blowing in and you have dark interiors that you're trying to capture both of those things by bracketing, using strobes. You have to be able to control that window light. So the A1 currently is the best tool for that exists. But Nikon jumped in, okay? They have the Z9. It's a fantastic camera. So, okay, now Sony has their Alpha 1 and they're hot and heavy competition with Canon, who has their R3. Now Nikon has their Z9. And this is where Nikon's flop comes in. What are we going to see next from these companies? Well, we have seen it next, right? So after the A1 came the A7 IV, and in true Sony fashion, a lot of A1 tech trickled down to the A7 IV. And I've had and used for months and months at a time both of these cameras at the same time. They behave a lot alike, the A1 and the A7 IV. What the A7 IV gives up to the A1 is it feels cheap. It does not have the resolution, but mostly other than that, the focusing system's great. It has the CF Express Type A card architecture on board, and there's a lot to like about the A7 IV. It is one of the best, most well-rounded cameras on the market right now. Canon unveiled the R6 Mark II. R6 Mark II is not a flagship camera, but just like the Sony trickling down its tech, the R6 Mark II has allegedly a better focusing system than the R3, right? And Sony, the A7 IV has a better screen. It's not only fully articulating versus the Alpha 1's just a flip screen, but it's about the Alpha 1's flip screen is a crap screen. And I still don't know why they decided to put this thing on the camera because it is a beast of a camera. And then it is the junkiest screen. You cannot see it in the sunlight. You can't see it with polarized sunglasses on. It's an awful screen on the A1. A7 IV, though, which was next up in the line of full frame. Okay, it's brand new sensor. It's Sony's newest full frame sensor design because the A7 R5 uses an old sensor. A7 IV got the focus breathing compensation that everybody that bought an A1 is pissed off about that it doesn't have yet in a firmware update. And so there are things that are trickling down to these cameras. And in some ways, the A7 IV is better than the Alpha 1. Same thing with the R6 Mark II versus the R3. In some ways, the R6 Mark II is a better camera than the R3, i.e. the focusing system and such. It's the same resolution. It shoots like 40 frames per second electronic shutter. It is several $1,000s less. And so these are really testaments to an R&D department, design department that is robust when they do that. Okay. Here is Nikon's biggest flop. How long have I been going? 24 minutes, and now I'm just getting into it. So, but thank you for the few people who are watching. Nikon's biggest flop is twofold. Number one, the Z8 is evidence of it. I am not saying, and please don't accuse me of saying, that the Z8 is a bad camera. The Z8 is a brilliant camera. Okay. But when Sony took 2 years from the A1 to decide how to advance the tech, they gave us that crazy, awesome screen in the A7R5. And those of you who've never handled an A7R5, I had one briefly. The screen is game changing. It flips and it tilts and articulates and gumbies all around in different ways. And it's a great screen too. It's of great resolution. It's got the dual CFXA. It's got the focus breathing. I think it has a focus breathing compensation. It has things that the A1 does not, even though it's a lesser product. That's trickling down. That's a good R&D department there. Canon, I think, is about to drop the gauntlet with the R5 Mark II and the R1 and all of that. But the R6, it's got things that the R3 doesn't have. Nikon took 2 years from the Z9 to strip it out to a lower price point with the Z8. That's a problem. They could have used that 2 years to do something like the other two companies had done. They could have given us a better screen. They could have given us better video specs. They could have figured out a way to get that poor one, I think it's a 1/250th, it might be 1/200th of a second flash sync speed because of the lack of mechanical shutter, to get that to more of a usable thing for those of us who work with lights. That's a problem. And that really screams of a company that does not have a healthy research and development program in it. Let's take a look at lenses for a second here. You get your comment off here, Carlos. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to, put you on blast there. Let's look at lenses for a second. So Carlos said, he loves the Nikon lenses, and I know what he means because they do make some very good native lenses. But here you have Canon, who just designed and unveiled their 100 to 300 constant 2.8 aperture the whole way through for, I don't know what is like 8 or 9,000 or something like that. And the 28 to 70 f2s, and Nikon is currently rebranding Tamron lenses. These are Tamron lenses that they're selling for more because it says Nikon on it. Probably the only reason they're selling for more is because they're paying Nikon to be able to rebrand them as Nikon, or paying Tamron to be able to rebrand them as Nikon. So this is troublesome for Nikon. Now, I know that there are sales reports that come out that the Z8 is selling very, very well, as it should. It's a great camera, but those things don't matter as much as being able to see 2020 in hindsight, right? So taking a long approach like I've just done and saying, look, over the past many years, here are the ways that these companies are innovating or not, and the ways that they're changing or not. Now, with Canon, like I was saying, you can tell that Canon is curating their cameras, and they're going for a higher sophistication customer. They're going for the professionals and for the serious enthusiasts and things like that, and they're protecting their equipment in some ways of being looked at poorly. Sony is the exact opposite. They want to be the market leader, which I think they are at this point, aren't they? Seems like they are. They want to be the market leader. They want to put their cameras in the hands of everybody. Nikon, I just don't know. I don't know what Nikon's. I mean, somebody tell me in the comments what Nikon's doing. They took 2 years. All they did was strip out the Z9 to make the Z8 to a lower price point. And yes, it is cool that it's a 45 megapixel stacked camera at whatever it is, 4,000 or whatever. And you know, and the current sales um, are strong. I mean, I don't think they can keep them in stock, but that's very transient. You know, anytime you have a newer camera, the A7 IV did this. You know, it's the number one seller. I mean, it still is the number one seller sometimes, right? The R6 Mark II did this and is number one seller. R3 never did, you know, because the R3 is too expensive. A1 never did. A1's too expensive. You know, I mean, there's a price point that works for most people and ones that don't. So let's see. I've got a few people don't have many questions on here. I'll go for a little bit longer though, and so then I have to go shoot. But what do you guys? Well, first off, you know, is my audio okay? I probably should have asked that. You know, more than not at 30 minutes in. So, but what do you guys think about Nikon? So that's the Nikon's biggest flop is I don't know what the heck Nikon's doing over there. Um, they don't seem to be competitive with Canon and with Sony. And it's hard to really see them. It's hard to know what they are, you know. So the only Nikon chatter that I see is a bunch of old guys sitting around. Because there's one guy, and he's cool. Like he's got like this big Texas radio voice, you know, and he has like these 4 hour live streams where all these other Nikon old guys will come in and you know and talk about Nikon and stuff, and it's cool, you know. And like I said, I love Nikon cameras. I loved my D7200. I want to see them succeed, but they're going to have to do things other than rebranding Tamron lenses as Nikon lenses and taking 2 years to, instead of innovate something, strip down a Z9 into a Z8 to be competitive with Canon and Sony, because Canon and Sony, they're bringing it. Every time they design something, they bring it. Canon designed the R5 and they gave us 8K recording in a mirrorless handheld camera. The only other camera that I know of that did that at the time was the Red Monstro, right? I mean, that's bringing it. Granted, it only works for like 4 minutes before the thing melts in half. But the camera that I'm recording this on now is the R5C. That fixed that, right? This camera, the R5C, can record 8K 60 RAW until your card runs dry because it has a fan that's cooling it. So they learned, right? Sony, the same kind of thing. Alpha 1, mind bending. A7R5, that's a very specific camera that they did because it fixes what was wrong with the A7R4, which I had. The A7R4 was a terrible camera, you know, and it wasn't a terrible camera because the image quality was terrible. The image quality is fantastic. It was a terrible camera because it's 61 megapixel. They're 120 megabyte uncompressed RAW files. The whole camera is slow. It's right into SD cards. Um, Tethering to an iPad, it takes forever for your preview to come over. So, I mean, the A7R4 was a terrible camera despite the 61 megapixel resolution. Everything else was bad about that camera. So the A7R5 really fixed it. You know, the sensor wasn't the problem, so they used the same sensor. But now they have the CFXA, they have the nice screen stuff like they bring it, you know. So I've been on 32 minutes. I've got 4 people watching. Thank you for those of you who have decided to watch. Let me know what you think in the comments. Ask some questions. Hey, tell me if I'm way off base with the whole Nikon thing. Because, like I said, I want Nikon to succeed. I don't know how, other than spending money on Nikon, I can help that to be accomplished. And that really begs the question, do I want to spend money on a potentially sinking ship? I don't think so. I know Carlos is into the Fuji medium formats. I think I'd rather buy one of those. So, anyways, good seeing y'all. I am my business right now, my busy season. So I shoot real estate and interiors full time. My busy season is slowing down now, which is very normal for this time of year. So I'm going to have some more YouTube content coming out at a faster clip. If you have any questions, leave them below. Please like this video. It doesn't cost you anything. Helps my channel grow, get this content out there to more people. And I'll see you again soon. Peace.